So we'll go into a little bit more detail on skeletal muscle fibers and the physiology of muscles. If you remember from the histology lab and lecture, we looked at skeletal muscle fibers, and skeletal muscle fibers were long, fused, multinucleated noodle-like structure, long fibers. They originally come from myoblasts. Myoblasts were these single nucleated tiny cells that differentiated and fused to form long skeletal fiber muscles in the developing embryo. Now, myo itself means muscle, and the other term that you'll come across a lot in this chapter is sarco. Sarco means flesh, and myo means muscle. Okay, so anything to do with muscle will be called either myo or sarco. Now, these myoblasts fuse to form long skeletal muscle fibers. Some of them don't really fuse into the muscle fibers. Instead, they just remain stuck to the edges. These cells are really hard to spot, but usually they are a big bump on the outside, while the fused cells have a nucleus on the periphery. The satellite cells look like a little bump around the skeletal muscle fibers, and these cells are very, very important because when you injure or tear your muscles, these satellite cells can undergo differentiation to stimulate the growth of new muscle tissue at the site of injury. Okay, so the cytoplasm of the muscle is called sarcoplasm. We'll no longer call it a cytoplasm, so keep this term in your mind. Sarcoplasm is the cytoplasm of the muscle cell. Okay, so if you take a look at the histology slides of the skeletal muscle, this is what you remember looking at a skeletal muscle. You see long fibers with multinuclei, but some of them have a little bump around. Let's just see, maybe this one might be a satellite cell. This one is definitely a satellite cell, and you see a whole bunch of sarcolemma over here, which is the plasma membrane of the skeletal muscle fiber. So this on top is the cross section of the skeletal muscle fiber. So you see this is a single muscle fiber, that's a muscle fiber. And this is the longitudinal section of the muscle fiber. So if you take a closer look at the longitudinal section of the skeletal muscle, you see the nucleus. So this is the nucleus of the muscle fiber. You see a whole bunch of nuclei scattered all around. But keep in mind, the nucleus of the skeletal muscle is located along the periphery, and they are multinucleated. So this is a muscle fiber. So each over here you see about 1, 2, and 3 muscle fibers in the longitudinal section. Now, the other important terms that you'll need to remember is the sarcoplasm, which is the cytoplasm of the skeletal muscle, and sarcolemma is the plasma membrane of the skeletal muscle. So if you see a whole bunch of pieces lying around in the histology slide, those were artifacts of improper cutting. Sometimes they separate while you cut the tissue sample, so they look like they're away from the muscle fiber, but in reality, in real muscles, they cover or surround the skeletal muscle fiber like the plasma membrane of the cell. Okay, now endomysium is basically the connective tissue that wraps around each muscle fiber, and inside these cells inside these muscle fibers you find a bundle of myofibrils. So myofibrils are basically where actual muscle contraction occurs. Don't worry about this too much yet, but we'll look at each of these in a lot more detail later.